what the communist Chinese have done in their brainwash is to create a sense of vertigo, to put the person's sense of self, and she uses this term, as well as those abroad who use the brainwashing model, to attack the person's sense of identity, the person's sense of self, to destabilize that sense of self, to put everything they believed their entire lives, everything their parents may have told them, the church may have told them, of any philosophy, to destabilize that and make room for the installation of a new belief system grounded in Freirean critical consciousness.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Late Night Ruckus. Have you ever wondered why our college campuses and universities have become so polarized? Well, my guest tonight has the answers. Professor Stanley Ridgley is a professor at Drexel University's Lebow College of Business and author of Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities. So stay tuned. Thank you, Professor, for being on the podcast.
My pleasure, Daniel. Always a pleasure to be here on Late Night Ruckus and talk about one of the major issues that's plaguing our country right now, the decline of higher education.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a perfect time to be on. You know, Trump was just sworn in recently. Hostages are continuing to being released in the aftermath of October 7th. Recently, there was a tragic shooting of the United Healthcare CEO.
Right.
And looking back, just to set the scene a little, about a month or two after the October 7th attacks, my brother reaches out to me. I live in the Upper West Side, and he says to me, "Hey, you want to check out the what's going on at Columbia University?" I live 20 blocks away. So I said, why not? Let's see what's going on there. And you walk past and you see these kind of encampments, which is interesting, even that the university allows it. And then we keep walking, and then the protests get louder at the entrance gates. People are chanting. And the second we walk past, they saw that we were not complying, kind of. The chants got louder and directed at us because we weren't joining in. So, right. So my question is, how do we go from, Berkeley was very proud of its free speech. Some could argue this is part of free speech, but it's definitely an antithesis of the marketplace of ideas. How do we go from, as a professor in your time at university, how do we go from a place that's where students are supposed to enter kind of exposed to different ideas,
right,
and different upbringings and ways of life and be challenged and hold ideas to get to the truth and the heart of issues, to such an intolerant kind of groupthink, that kind of brutal groupthink, like you mentioned in your book?
Well, yeah, it is indeed brutal groupthink, and people always ask me, well, who are these brutal minds and why do you call them brutal minds? Well, brutal minds are the people on the campuses who believe that it's okay to abuse college students, faculty, and staff with indoctrinating programs of psychological manipulation and behavior modification that are designed to change a person's belief system. Now, an outgrowth of this we've seen are the many demonstrations we saw since October 7th of 2023 and the terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel. And the mask of intolerance was torn off many universities, Columbia certainly, but also Berkeley and at Duke and at Emory and at Texas and Indiana, places where people who had really applied to get visas to come to this country to study decided it was okay to become political agitators. Political agitation of a particularly noxious sort, where universities were shown to be almost impotent in defending their own Jewish students from assault and intimidation, threats of death, occupation of buildings, blocking off of campus access to students of a particular ethnicity. All of this patently illegal, and certainly all of this basically against university rules. And we found that universities seemed to be impotent in enforcing their own rules to protect their own students from this sort of thing. Luckily, just yesterday, we saw a new executive order signed by our new president, which directs the Department of Justice to investigate and to assess university actions and inaction in protecting their own students. And I think this is a wonderful step forward that casts a spotlight on what's been happening on university campuses. We saw wonderfully that 3 university presidents, all from Ivy League schools, were forced to resign as a result of their, I would say, flaccid response to gross anti-Semitism on the college campuses. The campuses, I think most parents and donors think, and this is an image that universities want to propound, oh, nothing has changed in the last 25, 30, 40 years. It's still the university that you've always loved and given money to. And that university is one that, oh, the welcomes, a cornucopia of ideas to the marketplace of ideas to contend with each other and defend themselves. And if you're found wanting, you're dismissed from the arena to give up your space to other ideas. And most parents, and I think students, come into university with that in mind. And and that's not the way the university is. The left-wing mentality, the progressive slash Marxist mentality, is that the university is a petri dish. It's a indoctrination center. And the idea, according to Frederick Jameson, a very famous communist slash Marxist theorist, is that universities are here to train cadres for the struggles of the future. In other words, left-wing communist slash Marxist slash crypto Maoist cadres for the struggles of the future. That's the view of a lot of the progressive left. Most of the far left, in fact, they consider this as being normal. And so we have this great charade that's being perpetrated on our parents, on many of our donors. Just keep that money coming. We'll take care of all of the education that's going on. So it's a very complex issue. And I think that my book, Brutal Minds, has kind of torn away that maskirovka is what the Russians call it, the Soviets call it. This idea, this masquerade that universities haven't really changed much. Of course, they've changed radically, and we have to be aware of that and behave accordingly.
Yeah, and I would say I would encourage anybody to read your book to see what's going on. Not only because it gives you kind of an insight in recognizing it, because it's such a powerful kind of, you kind of liken it to cult think.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and kind of in a brainwashing sense. So it gives people kind of a stepping stone of how to kind of recognize and combat and some of their avenues. And I would say, not to sound the alarm bells, but it's just so striking that these universities seem so morally bankrupt. And you touch up a lot about Maoist ideology.
Yep.
And Mao had utilized like their old guard and the students to go after the four old ways of life, of the four customs, right? And they had went after the intelligentsia in the universities. How, and it seems like students are kind of dictating the kind of the terms of the universities, and it seems like the student life are kind of complicit in it. Like, how far, not to sound the alarm bells, but how close are we to a cultural revolution?
Well, to refresh your listeners' memory about the Cultural Revolution, it was initiated by Chairman Mao Zedong in 1966 and did not end until 1976. And it was a scourge on society. It was a scourge that basically killed about 1.5 million of their own people. It left psychological scars on countless hundreds of thousands of others, in which the intelligentsia were attacked, that students were required to abandon the universities and forced to go, as the term was, to go up to the mountains and down to the villages. There's a book about this called Up to the Villages and Down to the Mountain, up to the mountains and down to the villages, where students were forced to go and work in the fields and to learn proletarian ways by working alongside. And so this went on for 10 years. And the people who suffered under this demand to have their ages reset. I'm not making this up, because they feel they have a decade. And I had an entire small subset of my library on basic testimonials of people who lived through the Cultural Revolution, which featured statue toppling and destruction of ancient scrolls, destruction of buildings, anything that could be associated with the ancient culture, and two, anything that could be associated with Western lifestyles, bourgeois lifestyles. The capitalist lifestyles, people were accused of being capitalist roaders, which means you're following the road of capitalism. It was an extremist ideological ejaculation that just basically destroyed Chinese society for about 10 years. And how close are we to that? Well, we've seen signs of that. Quite frankly, we've seen official signs of it, in the sense that one of the patron saints of our own cultural revolutionists in this country is a fellow by the name of Paulo Freire. His picture's right here. Here's a book called Paulo Freire and the Cold War Politics of Literacy. Who's Paulo Freire? Well, backtrack. education schools on America's college campuses have been completely politicized by an ideology. And this happened about at least 25 years ago, whereby they have swept out the old theorists, people like John Dewey, who had his own faults, but basically embracing wholeheartedly 100% the theories of this guy, Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian educator who wrote a book in 1970 called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Now, Pedagogy of the Oppressed is the third most cited book in all of social science, so it's an important book. It's not an original book. It's a lot of cribbing and copying, mimicking the education theory from Mao Zedong's education theory. And anyone who's familiar with the education theory and how the universities were taken over and redirected and professors and intellectuals were abused recognizes this. And so but you can't say this if you're in an education school. You can't say, well, come on, we'll educate you according to the precepts of Mao Zedong's education theory. That's not going to appeal to anyone. But if you repackage or launder your ideas, your Maoist ideas, I call them crypto-Maoist ideas, through a Brazilian educator like this character back here, Paulo Freire, who's got a nice beard, a very kindly visage, and say, well, this is not Maoist, it's third world chic. He has a kindly visage and a wonderful gray beard, and he talks about oppressors and oppressed. That's our guy. He's basically a crypto-Maoist who cribbed his ideas from Mao Zedong. He was a fan of Mao Zedong. I point people to his 1974 article in Cross Currents called Conscientização, or conscientization, which means critical consciousness, where Paulo Freire said this. He said that the problem of the peasantry, the problem of educating people, where Lenin wanted to shoot the peasants down and Stalin put a bullet to the back of their head. Now, Mao came up with, quote, the most genial solution of the century, the great cultural revolution. So this is the ideological core of Paulo Freire and Freirean ideology. Now, the average person hasn't really heard of Paulo Freire, and this is what they, the educationists, all count on. It sounds very sophisticated and very in the know for them. Well, you've never heard of Paulo Freire and Freirean education theory. Well, Freire is this and Freire is that. They never say that Freire is a crypto-Maoist and was a great fan of Mao Zedong and a fan of Fidel Castro. Never say this, no. And so that's the kind of the core of the chaos that has emerged on our college campuses. And it's now, you mentioned student affairs. This is a big problem on college campuses right now because people always know that colleges and universities are, basically leftist bastions. That we've always had to deal with that. That hasn't changed. And what's the ratio of, say, left to right? Well, we know because Samuel Abrams, a colleague of mine at Sarah Lawrence College, recently did his own survey 2 years ago. It appeared in Wall Street Journal, appeared in other venues, where he found that the ratio of left to right is 6-1, left to right. We've always had to deal with that, and there's ways of getting around that, but that's the faculty, the bureaucracy itself, and these are student-facing bureaucrats with ancillary support staff. I'll tell you who they are in a moment. That ratio is 12-1, left to right. And now think of the enormity of that. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, why does that matter? These are just functionaries. Yes, they are. They're enrollment managers. They're academic advisors. They're residence hall staff. There's people who keep the pizza hot at the karaoke night, make sure the sound system works, that kind of thing. But they are encouraged. They are trained, I will say, to utilize their student-facing access at every waking moment to inflict on students this social justice message, this far left social justice message. They call this milieu management, and they call themselves college educators. Now, the official programming that they do is all part of what's called a co-curriculum. I teach in the curriculum. Faculty teach in the curriculum. People who are hired into the faculty are thoroughly vetted. You have to go through a lot of gateways to get to the point where you're considered good enough to be faculty. You have a certain expertise and expertness and in a certain disciplinary area. That's why we call us faculty. Now, these other folks, the student affairs folks, the enrollment managers, the clerks, the dance therapists, I'm not making this up.
Oh, wow.
They are hired by a different method. They're basically hired in a usual kind of almost a civil service method. It's a circle of friends of hiring that goes through a basic hiring process I can get into the university. I can be thought of as a university person by being an enrollment manager or by being a clerk, a coordinator. That's always a good one right there. And I can utilize my position and become what they call a tempered radical, where I can utilize my mission to use every opportunity I have to proselytize students in social justice. And that's basically socialism. It's basically collective mentality, collective ethos, as opposed to individual ethos. And it's imbuing students with this notion of critical consciousness of Paulo Freire back here. Well, these people shouldn't be doing this. They're not hired to do that. They're overstepping their bounds. They're exceeding their mandate, and they should be disciplined. They have even entire this co-curriculum I mentioned. How can you know that if you're in a co-curricular program? Well, they have funny names, fancy names, brave spaces, safe spaces, courageous conversations, difficult dialogues, racial caucuses, intergroup dialogues. These are all programs that are not academic in any sense of the word, that are either run by the on-campus DEI folks or the aforementioned enrollment managers and clerks and residence hall advisors, or they're run by people brought into the campus from independent diversity consultants who have hung out their shingle and who have worked in the diversity field for the last 30 years and who come onto the campus and at the invitation of student affairs, not the faculty, and run these programs. And these are indoctrination programs, you should know. Some faculty engage in the indoctrination programs, and I'll get to what that actually means in a moment. But I've been talking at length for quite some time, and I'll pause right there, okay, then.
Thank you. No, I welcome it. One thing I would want to just to rehash, I would say, so they, with their names, including replacing Mao with Frere, it's a very sanitized, more digestible version of the
Exactly.
ideology. And it kind of, what you're saying kind of like really resonates with me because I remember when I was an undergraduate, I was very interested in a program that was helping students with mental illness, just being like an extra resource. There was like a whole training program. The name itself was called Middle Earth. Sounded like something out of Lord of the Rings. And and it was run by master students in psychology. And I find psychology fascinating, but we would have different trainings come in,
Yeah.
people coming in to train us. And like, I just recall vividly at one point, because I was so confused, we were taught, and it was just the whole class just accepted as fact that the primary sex organ is the mind. And that just never, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a psychologist, but that just never made sense. I would always thought it's your primary sex organ, your genitalia, right? And everybody was like, no, it's your mind. And then that kind of led into this whole kind of gender fluid construct, which
Right.
I had to look up years later. I still think about it. Did I get it wrong? I would look it up on the internet. Like, what is the prime? And it's like, no, they had it wrong, but they were just pushing it as fact. Still don't understand why. So that really resonates. And you talk about.
Let's interject and say that's a wonderful strategy or a key entry point to begin, not with what they actually want to propound, but begin by talking, oh, well, the sex organ is the mind. It's one of those generic things. It's so vague. It sounds, it's kind of interesting. I really thought of it that way. And then that leads down the road to what they really want to say. So thank you for sharing that with me. That's a wonderful a tactic that they use.
Yeah,
When I say wonderful, I don't mean from my standpoint. No, I'm thinking it's a very successful and key tactic that they use, and I'm always looking for the strategy and tactics that they use so I can effectively counter that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole program was kind of just having an open mind. So it just seems so easy for everybody to just accept that as fact. Oh, they have masters in psychology. So, we'll take it as they're correct.
If you'd like me to comment on the psychology was overtaken a long time ago by the pseudoscientific types, the alchemists and the astrologers and that kind of thing. It was easily corrupted. Counseling psychology, that particular subfield, is actually particularly bad. And I'll give you an example. And I'm not someone who's shy about naming names. Psychologist Lisa Spanierman at Arizona State University is one of the most, I call her corrupt, I think she's guilty of malfeasance in the classroom. She's also not just a psychologist, clinical psychologist. She's written profusely on how to utilize psychology in the classroom in ways that are basically akin to brainwashing. I'll give you the example. And she believes she is correct in that you can make people feel guilty about anything. You can, if you use the proper stimuli, you can run a program or a classroom where you show people different films, photographs about something that they have nothing to do with, and yet they begin to feel guilty about this with the proper suggestions. She found and advocates, and she did so in an article that I have shared on my own website, that, well, because of this, she targets white male students with certain stimuli to make them feel guilty about events that they had nothing to do with. And once that guilty feeling is stimulated and brought to the surface, then those students can be more successfully recruited to work for social justice activities. Now, that's psychological manipulation. People ask me, well, do you have any examples? Yes, there you go. Psychological manipulation, behavior modification to change a belief system of a person. And that's his evidence. And it's on my website, my brutalminds.com website. You can go there and look up, search.
I'll also include a link to it in the
Yeah. And you can type in a search, Lisa Spanierman. And there it is. There's the article. There's the article that she wrote, not just what I say about it. So I found that on the left, there's always this tendency to ask for more and more evidence. Where's the evidence for this? Well, there it is. This is what she's doing, and she's the one saying that she's doing it. That's the evidence. So it's, I don't believe that. Well, then you're the problem if you don't.
Yeah, I would say, and you touched on it earlier, this idea of kind of student affairs. So in Brutal Minds, you're pretty, you recognize the fact most professors are liberal. You're pretty sympathetic to USIP, but most of them want to teach and teach the curriculum and not really espouse views. It's more of these student affairs types. They're kind of pushing these views down. So my question is, this pipeline, how is it formed? I know you talk about schools of education, this pipeline creating these kind of, I don't know, but loyal soldiers of this ideology.
Well, they're foot soldiers. They're foot soldiers of the ideology. This is basically all they know. And they believe, let me back up when I talk about education schools. Education schools, they're kind of the bottom feeders of higher education. They're not respected, and with good reason, given the low standards, given the functions that they've assigned themselves. So they were scratching their chins about 25 years ago, thinking, you know what? They have a tendency, an arrogance that goes with this ideological propagation that they do. They believe that again, Paulo Freire believes that, you know what, we are imbued with critical consciousness. You, Daniel, you, Dr. Ridgley, you guys are imbued with false consciousness, which all that means is that we don't agree with them and their embrace of critical consciousness, which allows them, they think, to peer into society and see the contradictions, to see the relationships of power and privilege. This is what how the education school people think. And they say, well, how can we expand our influence on the campus? Because right now we're not respected. Well, they say, you know what? We want to develop what you just called the pipeline into the university to expand our influence. Let's create academic programs, graduate programs, and masters in education, masters in higher education, masters in student affairs. We'll even add on an EDD, doctorate in education, in these fields that will train people to be part of the bureaucracy of colleges and universities. No one else is doing this. We will train people and make them effective foot soldiers for what we believe here in the education school with regard to critical consciousness and Paulo Freire and crypto-Maoism. And so they began doing this. And so they present this kind of false front of people that are qualified to be the bureaucrats who are they're not just bureaucrats, of course. They consider themselves more an ancillary support staff who will show you the way to the dining hall and keep that sound system working or manage the residence hall. No, they call themselves college educators. They do this. They abstract themselves up the ladder and call themselves college educators because that's what faculty do. And so they go, well, college educators in all corners of the campus, which basically elevating themselves, these clerks and enrollment managers and advisors, to the status of being able to educate students. But they're not educators. They're not vetted. They subscribe to the same point of view almost universally. And whenever a person is hired as a residence hall advisor, they automatically feel they have to get a chit a degree, an education degree as a chit. So they get their master's in higher education, their master's in student affairs, which imbues them with this Freirian, crypto Maoist perspective on education. They call it critical pedagogy. And then they begin climbing that ladder and they become bureaucrats. Well, as I've just said, 12-1, they outnumber the left, outnumbers the right on the college campus in the bureaucracy. And they award themselves this mandate to teach in this co-curriculum, which is a fake curriculum with fake faculty, and they even award fake transcripts. They do. St. John's University awards a fake transcript in the co-curriculum. Westchester University awards a fake transcript. And I talk about this in Brutal Minds, I kind of lay it all out there, that this is the pipeline that you described coming into the university through the side door, where they begin to influence the behavior and the belief system of college students in this fake co-curriculum.
Interesting. You touch on how they're cult-like. So I'm kind of curious about, rather than just espousing the ideology, how do they behave like a cult? And also in Brutal Minds, a lot of what you touch on the topic is DEI and racial kind of ideology. And what's interesting to me is, Castro, socialism, a lot of it is more just class struggle, and kind of a lot of people look at it, right, because it equalizes between races. So what is the obsession with races? It's hard, difficult to refute. What is behind their ideology, or in terms of utilizing race, and kind of how are they cult-like?
Well, number one, the cult function, of course, the student affairs college educators of student affairs utilize cult techniques when they're doing their indoctrination. What do I mean by indoctrination or brainwashing? Brainwashing is a legitimate term that appears in the DSM-5. This is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, edition number 5. It's a dangerous process. It is an actual psychological manipulation, behavior modification technique designed to change a person's belief system. It consists, generally speaking, of 3 stages. It was developed, this 3-stage process was developed in the 1940s by American social psychologist Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin is known as the father of the encounter group, if you'd ever want to know that. But he's also, and this is interesting, if you ever wondered where the word re-education came from, as in a re-education camp, Kurt Lewin coined that. He didn't mean it in a bad way, but it acquired this unsavory connotation later on, where so much so that the people who believe in this re-education, the brainwashers, decided they needed to change their term. So they changed it to transformative education, which they still use. Mm-hmm. Now, the Communist Chinese use the term, they changed their term from re-education or rectification. They changed it from that to education for transformation. So we use transformative education. The Communist Chinese still use education for transformation. What's being transformed? Well, the target, the student, the intellectual, the faculty members being transformed. So the 3-stage process that Kurt Lewin developed is called unchanging, changing, and refreezing. Mm-hmm. Unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. I'm sorry, I may have mispronounced it a moment ago, but it's unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. This consists in attacking this target, we'll call the target the college student, in very specific ways to destabilize the college student's belief system, whatever that belief system might be, to create vast doubt. And they apply what is called stimuli, different stimuli. But the first phase is to acquire, to gain the student's trust. Because without trust, without the student, awarding trust to the facilitator, to the people in the group with him, the brainwash won't work. And so they spend a great deal of time, and this is how you can tell you're in one of these sessions, by saying, well, we want you to make yourself vulnerable. This is an actual quote from one of their manuals. We want you to make yourself vulnerable. We want you to self-disclose. Well, what are you self-disclosing? Personal information about your parents, about yourself, about your income, about your friends, about your belief system. They're collecting information so that you can then be destabilized and attacked. How is this done? In the second phase, changing. Sherry K. Watt of the University of Iowa is one of the great perpetrators of this, who I think misuses psychology. She's a psychologist, and she's developed what she calls the PI model, the Privileged Identity Exploration Model, which is designed to do explicitly what the communist Chinese have done in their brainwashes to create a sense of vertigo, to put the person's sense of self, and she uses this term, as well as those abroad who use the brainwashing model, to attack the person's sense of identity, the person's sense of self, to destabilize that sense of self, to put everything they believed their entire lives, everything their parents may have told them, the church may have told them, of any philosophy, to destabilize that and make room for the installation of a new belief system grounded in Freirean critical consciousness. And I'll get to the race part here in a moment.
Mhm.
Critical consciousness, which is basically a crypto-Maoist collectivist belief system. The third phase is called refreezing. Now, this refreezing process is a series of activities that's designed to make the new belief system what they call take. We want this new belief system to take. We don't want any recidivism backsliding into the way you thought before. Mm-hmm. So we're going to give you a lot of activities, social justice activities, to reinforce what we've told you. They call this, and you may have heard this, doing the work. You may have heard this. It's kind of absurd. We are doing the work of anti-racism, doing the work of critical pedagogy. We're doing the work. This work is so important. Well, the racial part comes in where the DEI is grounded in critical race theory. It's kind of like an implementation program of critical race theory. Critical race theory comes out of critical legal studies, which came out of critical theory, which came out of the Frankfurt School of neo-Marxist theorists from the 1930s, 40s, with Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, with Erich Fromm, with Jürgen Habermas, Alex Honneth, all the way up to the present time. And the idea was and I should tell you, critical theory itself was a subterfuge. This is also in my book, Brutal Minds, where I believe it was Walter Benjamin, which was one of the critical theorists, was writing to his friend, and I can't recall, he's a rabbi here in Philadelphia. The account appears, it's cited in Brutal Minds, and his rabbi, a friend in Philadelphia, referred to what they were doing as Marxism. Mm-hmm. And Walter Benjamin said, no, don't use that term. We must use another. We don't use that. Because Marxism was not very popular at the moment. So we have to use something else. And so they came up with the idea of critical theory, because it was a subterfuge. It's not some new lingo that graduate students seem really intoxicated with this idea. I'm learning a whole new lingo. I'm learning a whole new vocabulary of transgressing boundaries, interrogating subject matter, dismantling the structures of capitalist society. Well, they came up with all of this to avoid having to talk about Marxism. Stephen Eric Bronner at Rutgers University. I had an email exchange. He's a critical theorist. I had an email exchange with him, and he says, "Yeah, that's exactly where it came from." And he pointed out several other sources where it came from. The idea that critical theory is really Marxism, and neo-Marxism. So that led to critical legal studies in the legal field. Derek Bell, who's considered the father of critical race theory, he began applying this idea of critical theory to the law, and followed by Kimberly Crenshaw and Gloria Ladson Billings, who in the late 1990s erected this whole edifice of critical race theory and began to apply it to education. The idea we're going to interrogate the assumptions, we're going to interrogate the structure and reveal the contradictions. We're going to reveal the systemic racism and institutional racism and the relationship of power and prejudice. Well, critical theory and the idea of critical consciousness of Paulo Freire was the ideal replacement for Marx's class struggle, class consciousness. Critical consciousness basically invited race and gender into the triumvirate of race, class, and gender, and it basically expanded the purview from just class, which is still kind of important in the Marxist enterprise, to encompass race and gender. And it simply kind of transposed the Marxist analysis to talk about oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited, bad, evil and good, It's a binary system. It's a very primitive. It goes back to the religionist Mani back more than 1,000 years ago. We've heard of the term Manichaeism, which means a binary either or good and evil system where you're either in one camp or the other. And it's a very primitive religion, a very primitive religious idea. And we find that Ibram Kendi subscribes to this and his How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he's a modest scholar, okay? I've read his book Stamped from the beginning, which received the National Book Award. It's pretty decent. He talks about the history of racist ideas in the United States. But his other book, his more recent book, the one that really fired the imaginations of the racialists, was How to Be an Anti-Racist. And in this book, he basically embraces this Manichaean binary of good and evil, of racism and anti-racism. For Ibram Kendi, there are no shades of gray. There's no nuance. There's nothing there that is new, fresh, or different. It's basically you're in one camp or the other. And of course, he is the one who defines what those camps actually mean. And you have to buy into this whole schema that he creates. And I'll tell you, the people who buy into it are some of the worst cultists you might ever meet. Now, on that issue of cults and how it's related to what goes on in higher education, cults are very good recruiters, especially the old line cults like the Unification Church or the Moonies. They have very sophisticated recruitment techniques that basically are paralleled in student affairs on the college campus when they're running these workshops. It's also paralleled by DEI people. How does that look like? Well, I'll just give you an example. Slogans and mantras. We know this inclusion and equity and inclusion, or inclusion and belonging. We hear this all the time. Oh, it's inclusion and belonging. Well, who could be against that? Well, the Moonies use peace and unity. This has been their long time slogan. Well, who could be against that, right? Well, so what we've just done is what you want to do is lead with a really unobjectionable slogan or mantra. Inclusion and belonging. Oh, it's wonderful. Peace and unity. Join us. They're almost interchangeable when you think about it. And they come up with slogans that are really, well, I can't use any other word other than just stupid. Diversity is our strength. Well, no, it's not. No, it's not. Innovation is our strength. Excellence is our strength. Attention to detail is our strength. No, diversity is simply a description of a result of some other process. And it's not our strength, certainly not a value. And so cults basically understand what kind of mentality, what kind of young person will be attracted to the message. And give you an example of how this works is the Moonies would have weekend, retreats in the countryside where they would load up the bus with eager young folks, and they said, "Come with us. We're going to give you meals and lodging, and it's a wonderful weekend." They don't talk about Moonies or what they're really going to be doing. Well, when the people get off the bus, they have body language experts who are in the cult and watching the young people. And the young people, the ones who have my eyes are wide now, wide eye. Oh, look at this. It's so wonderful. I'm just so great to be here. This is great. And they just usher them on in. On the other hand, there's a different type of person, streetwise, who's critical, who has not taken off his skeptical hat. And this person is like this, cocking an eyebrow here, like, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. This is all kind of strange. Those people are culled from the group, moved into another group, given something that's perfunctory, put on the bus and sent back to the city. So what you have done is you have called out anyone who might object to the cult, so they won't destabilize the recruitment process. And this leaves a bunch of folks who are then what is called love bombed. It's called love bombing. And you will find this in almost all the cult literature, particularly that by Margaret Thayer Singer. What is love bombing? Well, the idea is that I'm going to give you, Daniel, we're going to all surround you and give you a sense of unqualified acceptance. You are going to feel more warmth and inclusion and belonging and more peace and unity than you have ever felt in your life. You're going to find that they love your jokes, they laugh, they love your singing voice, no matter how bad it is. They love your clothing, you're an amazing stylist, fashionista, if you will. Everything you do is incredibly wonderful. And they talk in a lingo that you don't quite understand. You feel left out, and certainly you want to be a part of that. So you begin to learn the lingo. They're slowly drawing you into this, trying to gain your trust. and you begin to trust them. There's no reason not to no reason to distrust them. And so this part this process I've just described to you is exactly what student affairs and DEI people do in that first phase of the brainwash. Gain the student's trust by not presenting anything that will disrupt the person's psyche at all. There's nothing objectionable here. And so you'll find, as I mentioned earlier, in the brainwash manuals that are used, I have an entire collection of them that are used by faculty and by student affairs. They actually say, we want to gain the trust and create a trust building session that will drop the person's defenses. And let me interject here that the three phases I've talked about, unfreezing, changing, and refreezing, they've renamed those. Now, they refer to Kurt Lewin in their literature, but they've renamed them because that kind of sounds kind of sketchy. They've renamed it to defending, surrendering, and transformation. Those are the three phases that they put people through. So in the defending phase, the first phase is that they're basically getting your trust, et cetera, and they're kind of raising issues to discuss. There's nothing wrong with this. We're just discussing issues. And they want you to make yourself vulnerable, quote, and they want you to self-disclose. They'll even put you through games, which are designed to put you at your put you off guard. And I think you may have heard of the privilege walk. I don't know. Have you ever heard of the privilege walk, Daniel?
No, I have not.
Oh, the privilege walk is one of the many games they have. And I talk about the games and I give you a website where you can go look at their games in my book, Brutal Minds. For the privilege walk, here it is. There's nothing that's going to put you off guard like a game. It's a competitive game. No, it's an interrogation game. And they have you enter a darkened room with your other colleagues, the other students, and you stand in a line holding hands. And you are then asked a series of questions, leading questions. And if you answer yes, you will take a step forward. And if you answer no, you will take a step backward. Of course, your hands, the unity of the hands held together, that's broken. And you begin to have all these people that are moving forward, some people moving back. And it's designed to show which people have privilege in the room. And then they also caution this, we're not trying to belittle anyone. We're not trying to attack anyone. They say that we're not doing exactly what it is we're doing. They're doing all of that. And they're getting information from you that you otherwise would not reveal in a questionnaire or you would say, why are you asking me these questions? This is none of your business how much money my parents make. It's not any of your business, this or this or this, where I went to high school or whether I had a job. It's none of your business. But through the process and the vehicle of a game, which is really an interrogation, the revelation game, they're able to get this information to put you at your ease, gain information, and then move into the second segment, which is basically attacking that belief system, dislodging it, and replacing it with the idea of critical consciousness. It's incredibly cult-like in the sense that they're asking you to abandon your critical consciousness and to begin to absorb slogans and mantras that are couched in terms that social justice. Well, who wouldn't be for social justice? Well, a lot of people wouldn't be for it if you knew it was basically socialism and a collective lifestyle.
Interesting. And a few points just for clarification for anybody listening. The Moonies is a cult in South Korea, right? It's one of the well-known.
Yes, it is. Sun Myung Moon, Reverend Sun Myung Moon. They claim they're not a cult. It's a religious group. They may have softened their message over the years, but a number of books have revealed their tactics. I should tell you that the anecdote I told you about the bus arriving at the place and developing the two groups of people that are segregated out are the sheep and the goats. And this was really something that was revealed in an article by Richard Delgado, who's a lawyer. And he is one of the names that is associated today he's one of the founders of critical race theory. Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanchik, who are both lawyers now at the University of Alabama, but back in the day, they have an introduction to critical race theory. In his prior incarnation, Richard Delgado was studying cults and the implications of free speech. So that will give you kind of an idea that he's kind of slid into this notion of critical race theory. I don't know if there's an explicit connection. I happen to think there is, but you can judge that for yourself. But the guy who gave me who studied cults is involved heavily in the implementation of critical race theory on the college campuses.
Interesting. And then a few points I wanted to mention that really interesting. You said Ibrahim Kendi often determines what is race. It's just by his own determination. And I think that's so important in terms
Yep.
of recognizing, and I'm the biggest advocate of free speech. Even as a Jewish person, I
Yep.
support anti-Semitic speech because I think people don't realize if you take away free speech, you determine what's offensive by who's in power. So I think that's a cautionary tale, someone exploiting it off the privilege that he's receiving and the attention he's receiving from his book. So that's worth mentioning. Another thing, when I was in law school, the whole point was to learn analytical skills, and you take the
Yep.
law and you're like, how do you apply the facts of the law? And then when you issue this holding, how does that change if the case is a little different, if you tweak this or that? And these analytical skills are so important. But in law school, it seemed like everybody was kind of afraid because they were looking through kind of a filter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember like the Bernie Getz case. The professor had just
Yeah.
posed the question of how would you make a defense for this, and nobody wanted to touch it, or the people that who kind of advocated just in the lens of just making as a lawyer what you're supposed to be doing, were getting kind of attacked. And this doesn't seem to and it goes to antithesis of what a lawyer is supposed to do and supposed to be, and
Right.
it goes against analytical and thinking skills and using your best skills to sort without being inhibited by fear of being attacked. And you mentioned the testimonies of I think the UPenn, the Harvard president, and then in Brutal Minds you mentioned the program that the University of Delaware had,
Yeah.
and that program was kind of called back. And you wrote, the president didn't actually find this objectionable. It was just a loss of finances and bad press.
Wait.
So my question for you is, these educators, the president, they're supposed to be supporting this marketplace of ideas and having people be the best and thinkers that they can be. Why are the university leadership, do you feel, so cowardice or seem tacit, or even at some places supporting it?
Well, it depends on where the university's president came from, and we see a lot of corporate values, the negative corporate values, being adopted by these college presidents. In other words, they've taken the worst of business America, corporate America, and brought it into the nonprofit world of education. Where if you look at the testimony of Claudine Gay and Liz McGill, and later on Shafik Minosh from Columbia, they're very hedging. It's like they were overcoached by their lawyers, where they can't seem to make a straight statement about anything. They simply can't. The most obvious question in the world is do you stand against the anti-Semitism on your campus where people are threatening other people? And she said, well, that depends on the context. That's Claudine Gay. So, excuse me? So, well, I would say, well, can you give us a context where that might be acceptable? Is it acceptable to threaten someone's life? What's the context where that is acceptable? I wish that Elise Stefanik had done that. Although she did a credible job, an incredible job, I should say, in that. And why are they so cowardly? Because they're bureaucrats. Basically, they're bureaucrats. They're highly paid. They surround themselves with like-minded bureaucrats in a kind of circle of friends, a ring fence of staff that don't tell them the truth. They are basically protected from, in the same way that Joe Biden was protected. In a sense, that Joe Biden didn't know what was going on. He didn't know the negative polls that he was receiving. He didn't know about that. He didn't know that people didn't like him. He thought something else. And so college presidents are very much like that. I've seen that with my own eyes in my career in academia, that they're basically authoritarians. And they're soft authoritarians in the sense that they want the information that's fed to them to be very massaged and they want to keep the university out of the headlines. And as a result, that's the barometer by which they measure what it is they say and what it is they do. And so it's money and reputation that motivate the universities. That's why we saw such a wonderful upheaval and in reaction to what we saw with our own eyes on the college campuses, the sense that donors like Bill Ackman and a host of other donors basically said, I'm withdrawing my funds because Penn no longer stands for what I believe in. In other words, this no strings attached money, no questions asked is gone. And I'm not ordering you to spend the money in different ways. I'm simply not giving you the money. It's not it's people like say, well, he's using his coercion to tell the universities what to. No, no, no. I'm just not giving you the money anymore because I don't like the way you're using it. You're not using it for educational purposes. You are basically funding faculty that are signing manifestos that are going on Twitter or with the various social networks and defending the assassin that killed Brian Thompson in December. A very public announcement by a professor over at Penn, which is right next door to my university, who celebrated the man's murder. It's just the kind of thing we want. No, I don't want to be associated with that. I'm taking back my $15 million gift. Not going to give it, not giving you any more until you make a statement. And so that's why we saw Liz McGill resign, and then the chairman of their board of trustees, Penn's board of trustees, resign as a result of this. So this is kind of like a vomiting up of what we've been forced to eat for so many years.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say you really do a great point of laying out the framework of how students are who would be susceptible are so, and in this day and age, especially with the anti-Israel protests and anti-Semitic protests, this lack of nuance and in their thinking. You talk about this unfreezing and then refreezing and retraining, and it's interesting. Take the United Healthcare CEO murder. They haven't looked at there's a whole other topic about issues with the healthcare industry as a whole, but their insurance profit margin is only like 2%, and then the Apple phones they're using are exploiting people and making 40% profit.
Child labor in both in South America and of course in Africa, mining cobalt in mines and mining lithium, and they have no problem with that as long as it keeps the batteries flowing for their iPhones.
Yeah. So it's just how can this be productive for campuses? And I want to go to the portion of of what people have at their kind of the disposal to kind of combat this. Obviously, you're speaking at, and in Brutal Minds, you mentioned how a lot of these may violate federal laws and
Yeah.
Civil Rights Act, and then you talk about this notion of informed consent. Can you touch up on that a little bit of why would informed consent would be required for these kind of programs? Because in Brutal Minds, it doesn't seem like you're actively saying get rid of all these programs. You're saying no, but we need some more oversight.
Yeah. I think that the problem is that these programs, number one, are presenting what they're saying as the truth, the unvarnished truth. And these programs, and I've been in these programs, in fact, go to every program I possibly can to get firsthand information about it. You're given a kind of a caveat that, well, we have ground rules here. We have guardrails and ground rules with respect to what we're talking about today. And you find out very quickly that the ground rules are that you cannot disagree with what's being propounded, that you can't criticize it with counter information or factual. You can't disconfirm what's being said. You have to simply take that. And if that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. How can students defend themselves? Well, first, and also the idea of informed consent. Well, the idea of informed consent is a protection for people to prevent, without their knowledge, being experimented upon psychologically or medically. And it came out of the World War II and the Nuremberg trials and the Nuremberg principles that came out of those trials. That was basically a reaction to the medical experimentation by Joseph Mengele, and a host of others in concentration camps. And it led to the Belmont principles, the Belmont Statement, 1979, and our own common rule, which is incorporated in in federal law, the Office of Human Research Protections, which is basically before you can conduct an experiment, you have to get the informed consent of someone, which means that you have to explain to the person what you're doing, what the results are that they expect to see, and that you consent to this. And this is not being done. And they might try to say, well, we don't have to do that because you're not in the classroom because you're not faculty. You're in a seminar here, and you're about to do to these people what Kurt Lewin did to his subjects. You're about to do what the communist Chinese have done to their subjects. And all you have to do is explain exactly what's going to happen here. And they don't want to do that. And so I tell students, if you're not presented with the opportunity to have an explanation, and then sign a form that gives them consent to do to you what they plan to do, then simply walk out. In fact, you can collect all the information you possibly can and walk out with that information and file a complaint with that. I happen to know about most of this type of thing because the body on the campuses that is tasked with investigating this sort of thing is called the Institutional Review Board, where anyone who complains about this sort of thing, or anyone who wants to do an experiment, has to run their project through the Institutional Review Board, and to find out if the experiment is approved or disapproved. And as such, you get to know a lot about the Nuremberg principles and the Belmont report, and you get to know about the Office of Human Research Protections, OHRP, Human Research Protection. And so this is the big problem with many of these programs, that they do not adhere to federal law with regard to these types of things. And so, well, they're not really doing research. Well, yes, they are, because one of the main reasons we learn about this is in the articles that they write about their experiences. And these are kind of after action reports of the effects of the Privilege Walk and the various other games. Fishbowl is another one. Circle of Voices is yet another game that they use. And we see, you can learn all, it's really not interesting reading, but you can read all about the effects of these types of programs and how successful they are. Well, that's their term, because how successful the brainwashing was, and what you can do about student resistance to the program. This is how they characterize people the goats who don't go along with the program, people who do not take off their critical thinking hats. And they call this student resistance. Wow. And they have a whole lingo, a whole literature. It's a hoax literature, I call it. And I've read literally thousands of articles over an 8-year period. And I have my own personal collection of their books, of over 250 books that I've read and reviewed. And I'm also a member of the 4 main off-campus groups that do this type of thing. Let me interject a question for you and then answer that question. The question is, well, where do these people learn this type of thing? Is there a central place where people, these ancillary support staffers, can go to learn how to apply the brainwash? The answer is yes. Yes, there is. There are off-campus groups, 2 student affairs off-campus groups. One is ACPA, the other is NASPA. It's the the Association of College Student Affairs Professionals, and NASPA, whose name doesn't really comport with the acronym, NASPA and ACPA. NASPA has 15,000 members. ACPA has about 7,000 to 8,000 members. And they are completely suffused with this leftist, far left ideology of decolonization, of the very Paulo Freirean racial, critical race theory indoctrination. And I should tell you, the motto of the ACPA, I have a mug. They sent me a mug because I joined their group. It has, their motto is boldly transforming higher education. Think about that for a moment. This is the professional organization for student affairs, the ancillary support staff of enrollment managers and clerks and advisors and residence hall staff. Their motto is boldly transforming higher education. Well, who the hell are these people? And why are they trying to transform higher education? Aren't you just supposed to keep the students healthy and fed? Aren't you supposed to show them the way to the dining hall? Keep the sound system working and the pizza hot? Isn't that your job? No, not with their master's in higher education. Their chit that says, well, I'm an educator too. I get to use my master's degree. They learn this. They learn this in these institutes on the off campus. They run these institutes. I've notices for these institutes. If there's one in my town, I'd go to it. But I've also got the documents called the curricular approach in student affairs, which tells you how to run a curricular program on the campus. So there's a very tight grouut of folks who are mobilized to inflict this type of program in colleges, universities nationwide.
And I encourage anybody who wants to learn more about these groups to read Brutal Minds. You mentioned in the book they're around since like 1919, early 1920s. Has their methods of coercion and training kind of changed? Have you noticed?
Of the groups? Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. What's the main point I like to point out is that that they want to be university people. They fancy themselves kind of want to be faculty. They probably, they didn't get the training. They weren't acclimated to it. They didn't have the aptitude or whatever. And they want to upsell themselves and have been doing this in this organization for many, many years. In the last 25 to 30 years, if you look at their literature, and I seriously doubt many people do outside the little coterie of theirs. They have constantly upselling themselves in their theory and in their pseudo academic articles. They constantly compare themselves to faculty and look at their mission as they call it milieu management, which is one of the 8 points that the psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton introduced in terms of establishing a brainwash situation. They want to manage the milieu of the college or university 24/7 to make the messages that they have, the socialist message, the social justice message, inescapable. That's the whole point of all of this messaging. I'm going to talk to students about social justice when they come in to see me about their their meal plan, that kind of thing. And so they're getting this constant pounding and through repetition, the idea that, hey, well, this may be the way things are. But actually what you have is a very sophisticated method of messaging to young people to make this message inescapable, to the exclusion of any other messages that may be more cogent and more reasonable.
Interesting. And then switching topics for a second, I know the Trump DOJ in his first administration had brought a lawsuit against Yale University for discriminating against Asian American students and Asian students. So my question is, do you kind of foresee the, perhaps Pam Bondi's DOJ in Trump's term? Because I know Biden administration had rescinded that initial action. Doing anything or any avenues under the law that could bring against universities for kind of violating Civil Rights Act, informed consent laws, things like that? You see that as a possibility?
Well, we can certainly hope. You're not going to hear this with many other faculty members. I mean, they're having hissy fits, hand wringing and fainting couch and clutching at pearls. What are we going to do with all this chaos? I'm delighted, utterly delighted, and I think that we can only expect good things. The restoration of the American enlightened university with Pam Bondi's DOJ. We saw this with the series of executive orders that President Trump has signed in his first week. The executive order he signed yesterday with regard to anti-Semitism and going after the universities for their lack of oversight. So I see Pam Bondi's DOJ really just enforcing civil rights laws. That is the main thing that they're doing to ensure that the U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964, that the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equal protection, they are enforced on the college campuses. And they're not overridden or bypassed by private colleges and universities that believe they don't have to follow the Constitution, that they don't have to recognize constitutional protections, and private schools do believe that. I think that what we've seen is the idea that strings attached money. That's always been something that universities have said, well, we don't want strings attached money. Well, of course you do. You are getting strings attached money every time you apply for a grant. Well, what we found is that the federal government plans to apply this look at higher education as a federal subcontractor. Not a contractor, but a subcontractor, which makes them liable, the universities, to obeying federal law if they receive federal dollars. And this means in terms of research grants, in terms of big grant, in terms of student loans, that if you discriminate or do not follow American law, such as the last year's or year before last decision of Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard University and UNC, which outlawed affirmative action, discriminatory policies in enrollment of students into higher education because it discriminated against Asians. That if you don't follow this, then you're going to have a problem. And that problem, well, if you want that problem, it's fine, but you're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to utilize or receive those federal funds. And you have students who are attending your school who receive federal loans, and this makes you a federal subcontractor, and you have to follow the laws against discrimination, illegal discrimination. I think this is a sea change. I've not seen a whole lot written about that. That little section, I think it's section 2 of the executive order on DEI in the universities. The first executive order basically swept away DEI policies and personnel in the federal government with good reason. The second executive order was followed on the first day of 26 executive orders the next day was the one that applied to higher education. And I encourage, excuse me, I encourage everyone to read this who's concerned with higher education, and you'll be utterly delighted, because all it does is focuses our minds and hearts on U.S. civil rights laws that have been violated again and again and again by universities with impunity, seeming impunity. And yesterday's is the third of the triumvirate, or the troika of executive orders that I think that really impacts higher education. And we're going to begin to see a sea change. What we have is called preemptive compliance. We saw a lot of universities, this is the effect, it was called the Trump effect. A lot of universities resolved in the 2.5 months prior to Trump's inauguration, resolved a lot of lawsuits from Jewish students suing their schools for not protecting them and not following their own rules. Harvard settled its lawsuit the day after Trump's inauguration. This is called preemptive compliance. Their faculty, Philip Levine is one of those. It's not Philip Levine. I apologize. There's another faculty member who wrote for the Chronicle of Higher Education. Name slips my mind right now. Warns against preemptive compliance. Warns against that, saying, "Well, we don't want a chilling effect." I tell you what, it's time for a chilling effect for some of the pronouncements we've seen on the college campuses, some of the noxious flags that have been flying, some of the noxious people who have applied for visas to come here to the United States to study and utilize that time to protest against U.S. policy and flying flags associated with a terrorist organization. I think we need a big chilling effect on that kind of behavior and enforcement of both university rules and regulations and federal law.
One thing I also hope for is a stronger enforcement of either disclosure or kind of stopping funding from foreign government. Qatar, huge state sponsor of terrorism, CCP. That would be important as well. And then my last question for you is, and I most professors, most universities tend to have a liberal slant. I remember my property professor was a member of the Federalist Society, and that was a big talk amongst students.
I mean, he was normal. He was just a normal middle of the road guy, right?
Yeah. And very, very strong protector of individual property rights, which was good to hear. So I'd say my last question to you is, why did you decide to speak out? And then also, any signs of hope for a return to the marketplace of ideas at universities?
Well, I think that the Trump administration is providing an umbrella for the self reform of universities. I told you that university presidents basically, test the wind, test the breeze, and go in that direction. And whether they're spineless or whether they're courageous, we're going to find them going in the direction of restoring the enlightened university. Budget problems, anyway, are a big problem. Student enrollment are a problem. Irate donors are a problem. Enlightened parents are a problem that university presidents are going to have to come to grips with, and they're going to come to grips with it, I think, by restoring that university that their parents were aware of it, and by following law, and by restoring university to this enlightened marketplace of ideas that you referred to. What was the first part of your question again? The very first part of the question.
Why did you decide to speak out?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was not really a hard decision. I've always been contrarian to a certain extent, but I kept a low profile. I mean, I teach my classes. I enjoy the company of my colleagues. It's great. It's great to be in a university because, my colleagues, regardless of their political persuasion, some of the smartest people around, and they love to talk, they love to argue, and most of them, as I said, are concerned with their research and are not concerned with teaching ideologically in their classes, unless it's some off the reservation English professor somewhere, lit professor, some sociology person. But I'll tell you what prompted the writing of my book was the spineless university reaction to the killing of George Floyd in 2020, which opened the gates to a lot of pseudoscience and superstition and basically ideology in the form of DEI. It was like the left used DEI as their wedge issue. It wasn't only DEI, a whole host of other noxious left-wing, far-left policies followed in to the university behind the DEI proponents. We saw the establishment of massive bureaucracies, expensive bureaucracies at a time when universities are strapped for cash and raising tuition every year. There was no reason for any of this. I decided that I was going to speak out. I have been very vocal about this. I've always been factual. My own research has shown what is wrong with it particularly. In fact, my own research has led to my second book, which is coming out in late February. It's called DEI Exposed. Subtitle is How the Biggest Con of the 21st Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. And it's kind of like follow. It's not son of DEI. It's not son of brutal minds. But it does focus on DEI and the problems that comes with that. And it's right up to date. It's been accelerated into publication, so it does incorporate these fantastic executive orders that the president has signed into effect. And I hope will follow up with vigorous enforcement. And so I found that the truth will set you free. Truth is liberating. You no longer have to remain silent. I'm a big fan, if you will, if he has the deceased or late Václav Havel, the former playwright and president of the first president of the Free Czech Republic, who was a dissident under the Soviets. He wrote a famous essay called Power of the Powerless. You can find it online, in which he said he refused to live the lie. And this is the kind of lie that you found on college campuses. Under Czech society and in the Soviet Union as well, the greengrocer, this is his anecdote, the greengrocer would be required to put a sign in his shop window. And sometimes that sign would be changed. And this week it was Workers of the World Unite. Now the greengrocer just wants to sell his groceries and earn a kind of a modest living. He doesn't know what the sign means. He's not an ideologue, but he does know if he doesn't put that sign in the window, he's going to have problems. And so that model has been applied here at the university, where diversity is our strength. You can't disagree with that. You can't say, well, that's absurd. That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. It's no, diversity is not our strength. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are core values of our university. No, they're not. Who said that? You just stuck that on our website, Mr. President, because certain people have pressured you to put that. No, they're not values. They're simply peripheral concerns and policy prescriptions that certain constituencies on the campus want to inflict on us. So I think it's going to be refreshing that you can speak out, and I don't think a lot of people will speak out because they're too cowed, they're too trained to submit in kind of obsequious manner. But I do think that they'll be happy to cheer on those who do speak out. And so I'm looking for good things in the weeks and months and years to come with the new breeze blowing in Washington, D.C.
Now, on that note, Professor Ridgley, I just want to say, I got a copy of Brutal Minds right here too. If anybody, if anybody is interested in learning about this important topic, where they can find it?
Well, I highly advise Amazon. I'll tell you why. It's a Jeff Bezos organization, but they do good work with Brutal Minds. They offer the hardback, they offer the Audible, audiobooks, and they also offer a Kindle version. Some people have told me that it's certainly wonderful to own all three. It's like a collection. People like to, believe it or not, people like to listen to it while they work out. It's me talking for 7.5 hours. Lord, that was a tough gig.
You did the audiobook too? I
certainly did, and I did that in the studio right here in Philadelphia over 2 days. And of course, there's also the Kindle volume, the hardback. I mean, it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. But it does capture, I think, what's actually going on in the universities. I name names, I name schools, I name processes and procedures. It's not a laundry list of outrages that you see so many of these so many books that are friendly to us. No, it tells you who's doing it and why they're doing it, what their goal is, and how we can stop them. I should tell you, as just an anecdote, October 8th, I think it was 8th or certainly a couple of days after the attacks in 2023 in October, I went by the Hillel office or building at our university. I went in, I said, listen, I'd like to show support for our Jewish students and staff and faculty on the campus. Would it be okay? I talked to the rabbi there. Would it be okay if I wore a kippah or a yarmulke? on campus and in a sign of solidarity, because I don't want to tread on anyone's toes. I said, certainly, here's one right here for you. And they gave me an Israeli flag as well, which is right here behind me. And I said, sure. And I began wearing a kippah when I would go on campus to and from. Why? Because I said, I want to share the burden of threat, because at that time, the international jihad, et cetera, day of jihad, all that kind of threatening BS was going on. And I said, okay, I'm going to increase the Jewish presence on a campus by one person. And I did so. And so I said, it's time for faculty. It's time for faculty and staff to actually do something, to stand up and say, don't quietly pull someone aside in the hallway and say, listen, I really support you. It's terrible what's going on, and I really, really support you. No. It's time for that nonsense to stop. And I've had a lot of people tell me that what I do with regard to brutal minds and the research I've been doing for DEI Exposed, they really like that. I'm looking forward to them stepping out and saying that public in the weeks and months to come.
Sounds good. So I will include a link to Brutal Minds from Amazon in the bio. And Professor Ridgley, thank you for being on the Late Night Ruckus podcast. It was really, really great convo.
I enjoyed talking about these issues. My wife will tell you I love to talk, and I'm sure she's delighted that the pressure was off her and it's on your audience. I assume that you still have listeners out there listening to me. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Daniel.
Sounds good. Thank you, Professor.
Right.